FTX tried to hide billions of dollars in fraud, and now their ex-CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, is trying to convince everyone it was an accident. He isn't such a bad guy, he just got in over his head. And already there are financial commentators like Kevin O'Leary willing to vouch for him.
I just think he's a very interesting individual. Over time, we'll peel this onion, find out what happened. I don't think that guy has an evil bone in his body.
Now, it may not surprise you, but Kevin O'Leary is a paid spokesman for FTX. But even unpaid sources have parroted his claims. Take, for instance, the New York Times. They quote SBF saying he was just distracted and that's why FTX fell apart. Quote, had I been a bit more concentrated, that would have allowed me to catch on to what was going on the risk side. That's right, guys. If he only hadn't played League of Legends, he might have noticed he was stealing customer money. Now, of course, the New York Times was roasted for their uncritical take on Sam, as was Kevin O'Leary. But even respected financial journalists that I personally like Matt Levine of Bloomberg, have recently floated theories around that maybe this is fraud, but maybe not. Quote, I don't want to minimize the likelihood of intentional fraud and theft, but I want to say that the story of FTX also reads like what would happen if you and a few college friends set up a gigantic international financial exchange. Your friends are traders and engineers, not accountants and compliance officers. They're running a huge exchange and are too busy for paperwork. They move fast and break things. Now, stories like that, to me, leave me wondering, well, was this fraud at all? Or was it just a couple of college grads who didn't know the value of an accountant? Could be either one, right? And I want to address this, not because anyone in the media specifically believes that Sam isn't a fraudster, besides Kevin O'Leary probably, because of course there are plenty of legal reasons not to explicitly call someone a fraud. But I still think it's relevant to address these ideas and narratives either way, because you can be certain this is going to be SBF's defense. He may have been dumb, he may have been negligent, he may have made some mistakes, but he isn't a criminal. He already came out and said it once. I effed up twice. But instead of mentioning fraud, he says it's because of poor internal labeling that FTX fell apart, which I mislabel things all the time. And in a way, that's a compelling, simple explanation. Don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity. Or in this case, don't attribute to fraud what you can attribute to a polycule of 20-year-olds in the Bahamas getting in over their heads. That is basically what he wants you to believe. And so I'm here to answer that question. Could it possibly be that FTX is just a story of negligence? Well, the short answer is no. And the long answer is hell no. Since FTX unraveled, I've been speaking to Alameda insiders, FTX insiders, even people who called out FTX months ago, like short seller Mark Cohodes. And the one thing I'm positive of after all of it is that Sam is probably the greatest con man of our generation. The only real question I have is why did it take us so long to find this out? Now, as I share the evidence that supports this claim, bear in mind, compiling a complete post-mortem on FTX is admittingly difficult. In fact, the main person tasked with handling the FTX bankruptcy process also handled Enron, which is the definition of complicated corporate fraud. So you'd think it'd be no big deal, right? Nope. FTX is worse than Enron. Quote, never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls. Not only that, he says that everything he got from SBF in the way of evidence, he has, quote, no confidence in, which, isn't great. This is probably because A, Sam has lied, and B, it sounds like everything in his empire was a mess. Allegedly, FTX was approving expenses with, quote, personalized emojis, and that Sam was communicating with disappearing messages that were set to auto-delete after, quote, a short period of time. Not only that, Sam encouraged employees to do the same. So understand that we don't have a full picture of what happened yet, in part because, well, they deliberately avoided leaving one. And I would actually point to this as the first piece of evidence of fraud. You don't show up to the scene of a crime with billions missing and find out all the evidence is destroyed and say, oh darn, maybe they accidentally torched it. No, that in of itself is suspicious. And deleting your text messages and encouraging your employees to do the same, that just screams that you're hiding something. But even though they didn't leave us much to go on, there's still tons of breadcrumbs that lead us to the same conclusion. For example, take the corporate structure of FTX and all their subsidiaries. We've talked about this. It's incredibly complicated, but I'm supposed to believe that the guy who set this up is the same guy who didn't know it was wrong for him to take from one company and steal it. Isn't this the same guy whose parents are both compliance lawyers, sticklers for the rules? You're telling me that guy doesn't understand what basic fraud is? Incidentally, this is actually why Kevin O'Leary thought this was such a safe bet.
I'm a paid spokesperson to FTX and a shareholder there too. And big advocate for Sam because he has two parents that are compliance lawyers. If there's ever a place I could be that I'm not going to get in trouble, it's going to be at FTX.
Yikes. And yet, even after being defrauded, Kevin says given the chance, he'd bet on Sam again.
If SBF knocked on your door again and said, look, I failed in my last venture. I have a new crypto venture. I need money. Would you back him?
That's a great question. No one's asked me yet. I think we can all admit, you can love him or hate him given what's happened, but he was one of the most brilliant traders in the crypto universe. He also built one of the most robust platforms. We used FTX actively. It was a very robust platform that allowed us to get information on a compliant basis. So I really like what he built.
Would you back him?
The answer would be yes.
Unbelievable. I don't understand how these people can't admit they were fooled by SBF and just end up making fools of themselves. Now, there's another part of this story I want to talk about, which was, of course, the revelation that FTX, the exchange, and Alameda Research, the trading firm, were actually sharing customer funds. And there's been some talk of, well, maybe this was just a lack of compliance or accounting. But I want to suggest to you that SBF was not lacking anything. He purposely and deliberately profited from the vague relationship between Alameda and FTX. And the first sign of this was when I spoke to an insider at Alameda. He told me that they would often use insider knowledge of the coins that were going to be listed on FTX, and then they would go buy those coins up, knowing that it would pump in price when it was finally listed. In other words, an easy profit could be made. This, by the way, is similar to what happened on Coinbase, and 3 people were arrested for insider trading in that case. But unlike Coinbase, this wasn't rogue employees. This was Alameda itself doing this. So let me get this straight. If it was criminal when 3 individuals did it, what does it mean when an entire organization does it? I even asked the Alameda insider if they thought that it was criminal behavior, and they told me, quote, it was probably criminal in hindsight. Yeah, you know about the 2020 of hindsight. Sometimes you realize, wow, that was probably illegal. Now, this insider evidence is actually further validated by public reports that Alameda Research amassed swaths of tokens ahead of FTX saying it would list them, according to an analysis of public blockchain data. This is from the Wall Street Journal, and it just corroborates this insider testimony. There's insider trading going on at Alameda. So do you think someone, Sam, who is doing criminal activity, is going to want a bunch of accountants and compliance people sniffing around? No, they're going to want criminals hanging around them.